as Luke said, I'm Claire Dracott. I'm the Deputy Head of User Experience at News UK. And I'm here today to talk to you about designing with data. And I'm going to show you kind of a case study that we've worked on with the Times and the Sunday Times and show you kind of how we've spun up a team and some of the successes that we've seen over the past 8 or 9 months. So to give you a bit of backstory. So for those of you who don't know who News UK are, so we are a big media organisation, and our main 2 brands that we work with on a day-to-day basis are the Times and the Sunday Times and the Sun. So big kind of newspaper brands. So as you can imagine, the organisation is rather large. We have a lot of departments that we work with on a kind of day-to-day basis. So we have the newsrooms, as you can imagine, the kind of editorial floors. So we work with them every single day. We have the commercial teams. So thinking about how we can actually monetize some of our experiences that we're designing. And then we have the marketing teams as well. And we have separate departments for Times and the Sun. So UX&D work really closely with these departments and all of these stakeholders that sit under all of these departments. And we kind of work with them to understand what they need and what they want to kind of meet their targets. And we then work with them, and that then trickles down into technology where UX&D and data sit. So we are kind of 2 of many teams within the technology setup. And that's the key area that I want to talk to you about today. So we felt like we were doing quite a good job of actually speaking with the stakeholders, understanding what they want. But actually what we were doing is down in technology, we were working quite siloed and weren't really utilising each other's expertise as much as we should have been. So this kind of all came about by a conversation that we were having about a year ago to say, how can we really work better together to start achieving some kind of big step changes within the company. So because of the way we were set up, from a UX&D point of view, we had some core challenges. And the main challenges were really around the misalignment of priorities. So what might have been UX&D's top priority wasn't necessarily data's top priority. So this then had an impact in timings. So quite often what we'd be working on, we would have to wait to kind of really utilise the data expertise. And that then quite often meant that it was a really long-winded approach for us to get what we needed if we couldn't do the self-serve ourselves. And this then meant that we, within our kind of end-to-end narrative, we quite often had a lack of quant data within that kind of presentation. So it was missing, and we weren't really utilising the expertise as much as we should have been. So we knew there was a problem, and we knew we needed to do something about it. So as a business, we decided to then work on a small area of the company, and we decided to look at the Times and the Sunday Times. And we started kind of kicking this off kind of early January, and this is the case study of what we've actually done and the successes that we've seen over the past 8 or 9 months. So we knew we had that problem, but as a company, we knew in order to make any headway, we needed to really better align as a company. So instead of having all of these different departments all focusing on different targets, we knew that for the Times and the Sunday Times, we needed to be focusing on that one clear vision. We also knew that we wanted to work quite rapidly. We wanted to kind of change the mindset, not necessarily have to go through multiple hoops to get things signed off, but actually start working quite rapidly and put together smaller teams to really empower them to kind of experiment a lot and not be afraid to fail, throw things out there and see what was working and what wasn't. So that was from a business point of view. And from a UX&D point of view, one of my main things was to really get everyone thinking on the same page. So not allowing stakeholders to come to us with solutions, but actually changing the mindset, them coming to us saying, this is a problem, how can we work together? What can we do about it? So what we did. So for those of you who know the Times and the Sunday Times, we sit behind a paywall, which essentially means you have to pay for content. So you land on the site, you might get the first kind of couple of paragraphs and then it's chopped off and you have to pay. You essentially have to become a subscriber. This paywall was set up in 2010, so we've had it for roughly 8 years now. And we've seen some great successes. We have over 500,000 paying subscribers who are very loyal to the brand. But actually, we know there are so many different target audiences out there that we really needed to kind of aim our messaging at and try and see if we could convert them. So this was kind of one of the core areas that the business wanted to focus on. So our main objective was to reach 1 million known subscribers by 2020. So we were setting kind of quite visionary, thinking kind of 2-3 years in advance. We came up with a big kind of vision piece as well. And then our strategy was to really focus on getting those customers to subscribe. We then have different teams looking at how we can actually keep them. So really looking at, okay, if we do get more people to subscribe, how do we then retain them so that they don't churn? Because it kind of defeats the object of all the hard work we're putting in the kind of get area. And then lastly, it was all around how can we continue to grow our audiences? So how can we go out and continue to learn about who these target audiences are and kind of get on the front foot of that? So we had the kind of core objective with the whole business, the whole of the Times and the Sunday Times actually aligned. We then set up a team. So going back to kind of the key areas that we wanted the team to be able to achieve. So we wanted them to be empowered, we wanted them to be working really quickly, we wanted them to be able to experiment a lot, and we wanted their productivity to be really high. So through a lot of kind of experiences with kind of setting up teams, we were working towards 7 being the magic number of roles within that one team. So I'm sure a lot of you know, but kind of the more people that you actually add to that team, above 7, you actually start reducing the effectiveness by 10%. So they actually say each team member then starts reducing that effectiveness, which is huge. So for something that we were spinning up and we were kind of trialing this, we wanted to make it as kind of smooth and successful as it could be. So we then started looking at how we might do that, and we actually came up with 7 core roles to basically put together in a cross-functional team. So we had that product owner who was essentially driving the team and making sure they kept going back to what the goal of the business was. So they were basically keeping them on track with everything that we were doing. We then had a UX designer. We had a UI designer who kind of would pair quite often. We'd have a BA. We started with 2 engineers and we've since ramped that up to 3. We had a data scientist, so we could work really closely with them. And then probably one of the most important roles within this was actually having 1 marketing representative. So that basically meant that instead of having the 9, 10, 11 stakeholders that we used to have, this team had 1 person to go to. They had 1 person to get decisions from, and it was then down to that person to communicate that wider to marketing. And it was down to them to really make sure that everyone was on the same page with what we were doing. So it just meant that the team could work really quickly and continue moving and didn't have any blockers. So we had that vision piece, we had the team set up, we then needed to think about where to actually begin. So we started looking at where we should be focusing. So the UX designer started mapping out the full kind of end-to-end flows. So they were really looking at how, from an acquisition point of view, kind of the channels in, where people are landing, and even that point before. So we did an awful lot of research around triggers. What is actually triggering someone to the Times and the Sunday Times? So we did a massive kind of research piece as well as mapping out these end-to-end flows. We then layered on top a lot of the kind of opportunities and the current data that we already knew. For the sake of today, to keep it really high level, the 3 main areas that we have are the editorial site. So this is where the majority of customers land. And this is obviously where they see the subscription messaging. We then have the store, which is basically where someone can become a subscriber. They can choose what packs they want and they can read up about what it actually entails to be a subscriber. And then we have the checkout, which is quite straightforward. And you kind of go through all of those 3 websites and they then are kind of after that journey, you're then a subscriber. So we wanted to look at what we should be focusing on. So we looked at the kind of the data and how people were using it, but we also looked at the conversion funnel to see where people were dropping off at the key points within that journey. And some of the stats that we found were actually quite alarming. So Of those prospects who said, yes, I want to become a subscriber, what we found was that they then went through to the store to find out more about becoming a subscriber, and we saw a drop-off of 45%. So actually, you think about this, all of them have, or the majority of them, have intentions of becoming a subscriber, and yet we're losing about half of them. And what's maybe even more alarming is that of those people who went through to the checkout, entered in their personal details and even their payment details, for step 3, we were then losing 7%. All they have to do is tick a T's and C's and hit confirm, but we were losing them. So we knew there was something drastically wrong with the setup and the kind of usability of this end-to-end journey. So on top of all of this data, we then layered on top the kind of not just what is happening, but exactly why is it happening. So speaking with a lot of customers to understand, why is this happening? Why are they dropping off? What's the kind of emotions that they're feeling throughout this journey? And then at the very top as well, what we notice is that of all the prospects, of all the millions of people that come to us every single month, we were losing 96% of them. So I know not everyone's some people just land there because they've clicked on it through kind of a search. They might not have intentions to become a subscriber, but this was exceptionally high and we knew we could do something to try and improve that. So what that cross-functional team did is we started chunking up the work. So we basically broke it down into 2 areas. So we had the cleanup, which was essentially looking at that end-to-end journey, seeing how we could improve that. And then we had the smart journeys, which is essentially looking at that kind of top level and seeing how we could try and entice more people through that funnel. So we started with the cleanup. What was really important for me is when we were spinning up this cross-functional team, that the UX designer and the UI designer really took the time to get to know all the other members of the team, and they could really understand where the strengths lied within the team, but also say to the team, this is our design approach, this is how we work, and this is why we do it. So our kind of iterative approach of kind of coming up with these ideas, fleshing them out more, and then rapidly testing, that was really important to me, and that was what we kind of kept within that cross-functional team. A lot of the talks have covered this today, but around remote testing, and this was actually what we tried to kind of follow a lot within this team, purely from the fact that we wanted to be working really quickly. Remote testing actually just worked kind of hand in hand with us and worked really well for our setup. So we started looking at the store. This is an existing design of the store, absolutely hideous, but some of the kind of core data points that we had were that on average it took the user 30 clicks to actually become a subscriber. We were showing them 13 different subscription packs to choose from. So essentially someone's landing there, there's so much information to actually take on board. How are we ever expecting them to make a decision? So they had to compare between these 13 packs, all different price points, all different entitlements, to say what pack it was they wanted. And then we also, within this store site, we had on average about 25 pages. So there was so much information for the user to actually take on board. So there was a lot we needed to do. So we started speaking with customers to really understand, how are you feeling throughout this process, and what type of emotions are they feeling? And what we tended to get back was just a sense of kind of overwhelming. There was just too much there. It was really hard to actually decipher exactly what information they needed to know, and there was just quite a lot of anxiety. So after a lot of that kind of looking at the data and kind of speaking with customers, we completely did a redesign. So the look and feel did change because we wanted the journey to be seamless from the editorial site. So we did slightly switch up the design, but we just massively simplified it and stripped it back. We knew from speaking with customers what information they needed to know. So we managed to kind of massively simplify that, and we went from having 13 subscription packs down to 3. So it was quite easy and simple to compare between them and choose the pack that was right for them. As a team, we then chose to actually push this live against the control. So we did a kind of A/B test with this just to see how it was performing. And what we found was that this new site was performing 5.7% higher than the control, which was great. We'd made kind of improvements. What we wanted to do now is switch on this one because it was performing better, and it was a slightly more seamless journey, but it's now down to the team to kind of continue iterating this. Maybe it's at a slightly smaller scale, but continue iterating it and really try and boost that number and push it as far as we can. So that was the store. We then started looking at how we could really optimize the checkout. Again, this is the existing design. This was done many years ago, and it was essentially designed for desktop. If you actually put this on a mobile web experience, you have to scroll before you even see any form fields. So not ideal for a checkout. It also looks very inconsistent to the rest of the journey. So actually from a lot of the research that we were getting, it felt quite untrustworthy, and people landed on this site and said, I don't even know whether to trust it. It doesn't feel like it's kind of on brand with the Times and the Sunday Times. And lastly, there was just, again, too much information. We were trying to collect too much data from the user at this point. So we had to massively strip back absolutely everything, kind of reduce a lot of the form fields that we had, reduce all of the unnecessary ones, add that kind of sense of progress just to set expectations with the user, let them know exactly where they are and how long this process is going to take, and obviously design for mobile. This is something that we have pushed recently, so it was probably about 4 to 6 weeks in total from kind of picking this up, doing a lot of research and building, and we're now pushing this out to a really small percentage of people, again following suit of the store to see kind of how it works. Is it successful? So that was kind of the clean-up piece of work. We felt like we'd done a decent job of the store and the checkout, and it was now how can we kind of just continue iterating that to keep improving it. But we then wanted to kind of shift focus onto the smart journey. So this is kind of that end-to-end journey we felt was in a good shape and was reasonably seamless for the user. We now wanted to focus on that top part of the funnel. So of that 96% drop-off, what could we do to really improve that? So from a UX perspective, the first thing we set out to do was really understand who our target audiences are, understand all of these different user types that we have, and really get to know them a bit better. So I think it's fair to say we know our subscribers exceptionally well, but all of these other user types, we really needed to do a better job of understanding who they were and what their needs were. So what we found, there were 3 main user types, which I'll go through today, but obviously under every single user type, there were then multiple segments of users. So all in all, there were a lot of different groupings of customers that we knew very little about. So very high level for today, the kind of main ones are people coming to the site who are completely unknown. We know very little about them other than a few data points that we can pull. We have something called registered access. So these are unknowns who have essentially given us an email, a name and email, and they then become a registered access user, which basically means they get 2 free articles every single week. And then lastly, this was around subscribers. So these are paying subscribers that we know a lot about. And like I said, these are the main buckets, but under each one, there are many different segments. And what we actually found was that, lo and behold, they all have exceptionally different need states, exceptionally different behaviours, and even their triggers to actually come to the Times and the Sunday Times in the first place, they were all very different. But what we found, we were giving them a one-size-fits-all approach. We had one experience that had to fit absolutely all of these user types. So we knew it wasn't fit for purpose. We knew we needed to do something about it. So this was the point where we started to think, okay, how can we better know who is behind that product? How are they ready to start converting? What content do they need to see? And what time within the journey should we be showing it to them? So the cross-functional team then started looking at potential experiments that could be run to really think about how we could be achieving kind of multiple experiences for these different user types. They then started writing a lot of hypotheses for these experiments to understand kind of what's the assumptions, what ones should we be going with. We then layered on top kind of what's our confidence behind each assumption and what one might be a quick win / less risky for the business. And that then helped us kind of define where we should be starting. So the initial experiment that we did, we probably kicked this off a few months ago, but the initial one we did was looking at the next best action for unknown users. So these are people landing on the site for the first time and we know very little about them. Like I said, the previous experience we were giving everyone, was they land on the site, they'd get a cut-off article, and then if they wanted to read more, they had to give us their name, give us their email, and then they could read the rest of that article as well as 2 more every single week. That was the previous experience for everyone. But what we wanted to do is work really closely with the data scientists that we had within that cross-functional team. And we wanted to say, how could we start splitting these experiences? And the data guys came up with an incredible propensity model to basically say, of these people landing on the site, what data attributes do we know about them? What can we take from that to basically then give them a score? So say like I was to land on the site, I would get scored between 0.1 all the way up to 1. If I'm the higher end of that scale, I'd see the high propensity experience. And if I'm the lower end of that scale, I'd see the low propensity experience. So this is the data team they spent quite a long time mapping all this out and actually building it quite thoroughly. But from a UX and D perspective, what we wanted to do is kind of keep the mentality of rapidly working and not going too kind of blue sky and too overboard with the experiences we were creating. Because we essentially wanted to see, does this propensity model work? Does it have legs? Then what can we do with it in the future? So the 2 experiences were essentially low propensity. If you're not quite ready to subscribe, we're still going to shoot you down the reg access journey. If you are ready to subscribe, or we feel like you're ready to subscribe, you'll then be seeing straight away a subscription message and take you straight through to the checkout. So kind of cutting out that decision making straight through to the checkout. We're quite a risk adverse company. So for this in particular, we started with a very small group. So we started with one of our international countries, just looking at Canada, because that was roughly 2.5% of our traffic. So we wanted to do that to basically say, does this work? What can we actually do with it? And then if successful, we might potentially roll it out further. And what we actually saw is that the high propensity experiment was performed 34% higher than the control. So what that essentially means is of 100 people that were landing on the site that would have previously seen that RA message and might have been a blocker, 34 of them, they were ready to subscribe and they could do so easily and successfully by clicking that and going straight through to the checkout. So overall, really successful. If we hadn't have put this in place and been working really closely with data, we potentially would have lost these people. They might have gone down the reg access route, they might have come kind of 2nd, 3rd, 4th session, and then they might have subscribed, or we might have lost them entirely. So overall, it was really successful. We then, from a UX perspective, didn't want to stumble across the kind of same mistakes we'd already made in the past and do a kind of one-size-fits-all approach for kind of all the different countries that we are that read the Times and the Sunday Times. So what we did is we worked further with data to basically say, what's that optimal threshold for every single country? So that kind of magic number when people are landing on the site, should that be the same for the UK and Canada, or should they be slightly different? And basically what the data teams did is they managed to map out the propensity of people successfully converting versus those who dropped out at some point of the journey. And where they overlapped, that was kind of the optimal threshold. So we now basically have a magic number for every single country that the Times and the Sunday Times is read in. And this is really important because literally 0.1 could be the difference of 100 more subscribers. So it's really key. So this was kind of our first experiment that we ran really closely with data, basically seeing what that collaboration could do. And it's kind of the first of many. We're now starting to look at, of those lower propensities, instead of just seeing an RA message, are they even ready to do that? Do they need to learn more about the brand? Do they need to know more about the content that we actually supply? Do they need to know more about our journalists? There's kind of all these great further experiments that we can be doing to really see kind of what resonates with the user. And hopefully one day we won't just have a kind of either or, it will be 10, 20 different experiences for these users. So that's kind of a whistle-stop tour of the last 8-9 months with one of the teams in the Times and the Sunday Times. But it's something that was basically born out of a conversation that we had to basically say, we are working in silos, we need to be working better together. And it's something that we kind of spun up really quickly, but we got backing from the entire business, and we've seen some great successes from it. So some key advice and kind of takeaways that I would give everyone. So the first one is to go searching. So really better understand your organisation, know where you fit in the organisation, and better understand the other teams that you work closely with. That's really important because then you can say, okay, we have a great relationship, we work really well together, but you can start understanding more of the areas where you can better utilise their expertise. I'd also say try and get the business on board and make sure they're aligned if they're not already. It's so hard to kind of to be dedicated to something if priorities are always switching. It used to be like that, but by kind of getting the business on board and getting everyone aligned, everyone focused on that one goal, and that picked up kind of momentum and really got us moving with some of these successes. Secondly, I'd say to start somewhere. So having some data is better than none. And for me, it's really key to start making the data more visible. So actually putting it on screens, whether it's within the office, but making sure you're working with the kind of data teams to say, this is what I need to know, and make sure it's for you, it's for the business, it meets the kind of aligned vision and the KPIs that the business have set, but make sure they're visible to everyone. And you could even go as far as to start setting alerts to say, I'm really interested in this, when it dips kind of X percentage, alert me. I want to know and kind of live and breathe this data. And lastly, my advice would be sharing is caring. So for me, the most important thing to make this a success was when we put that team together was to really make them gel, really make them kind of come together as a team, understand why they were all part of that team and where their strengths really lied. This was really important so that from a design point of view, you could kind of say, this is what I bring to the table, this is my design process, and you could also better understand every other single role. And that really helped bring everyone together and feel united as that team. And then I'd also say, as a team, you have to be over-communicating absolutely everything that you're doing with the business. So share everything, share your insights, share your findings, share your testings, whether it's positive or negative, it doesn't matter. Even if you fail at something, it doesn't matter. Share it with people, get in front of them, say this is what we've done, this didn't work, but this is what we've learnt from it. The key here is that although you've got 7 people working on one goal, you need to be taking the entire business on a journey with you. Thank you. I've got 29 seconds.
One question.
One question. Any questions?
No questions.
I think I got away with it. Oh, you got one.
The unknown quantity that you had hardly any data on. What data were you using then?
So it was very little. So we basically knew location, what device they were on, and the amount of times they'd come to the site. I think there might have been one more. I think there was 4 data attributes, but it was very little. And basically what we were doing is we started off kind of as stripped back as we could, and we were really playing around with what that magic number was to begin with. But we started really stripped back, and then we started building kind of lookalike models to basically say, of the 5 people that have come on mobile and it's their 5th time and blah, 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 scoring 0.6, they all went through to convert. So we then started building up these groups so we could then be a lot more confident with what we were actually putting in front of people. But we did start kind of guessing a bit to begin with.
It was like financial, whether they were potentially.
Yeah, so all of that played into it to begin with, yeah.
Okay, so please can we put our hands together for Claire?
What do you need?
Yeah, don't have my clicker, but next up we've got Dr. Nick Fine again. He's doing a presentation that I don't know what the name is because this is a last-minute substitute presentation. So it should be interesting. It will be based on psychology, and if you heard him earlier, I'm sure you want to stick around.